Okay, so now we're inside of Red Hat, and you will have gotten this from me. And this is already set up and ready to go with servers and development. All we need for that, we are going to be compiling the kernel later on this quarter. So those tools are there, which is absolutely a must. And I'll go through how to do that later on, week 7 here. I have you guys do it earlier because you need the time to do it. All right, so let me blow this up a little bit here. So this is Red Hat. Is a little bit, it's almost identical to CentOS, only it's better and easier to use. So those of you who have been using CentOS previously, this is a little easier. And we do get to go back to Red Hat because it matches our book now again, and it's still being used and can receive updates and all that. That was the problem before, is the other ones were discontinued that were with the book, and so it would corrupt servers instead of making them work when we did updates and installs. So can't do that. Basically, what you're going to do here is first become root. And so in order to become root, you're going to say su space dash dash. There's double dash, not a single dash. There's a difference between it. Single dash is only partial root. Double dash is full root privileges. So you definitely want to do that. We're going to do password for the password. And then now I'm root. And you can see that right here by it saying root here first, then at localhost. So here localhost would be the computer. In this case, that's the name of our server. If I had this named as a different name for the server, that other name would be there. And then here is the location where we're at. We're inside the folder student right now. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, so if I do cd like that, then it takes me out of there because it takes me to the home directory. It's the same thing as saying cd $home and taking me back to the home directory for root, which would be /root. That's where we're at currently. I can prove that by typing in pwd. Or present working directory. Ta-da, there we are. ls, etc. But so, anyways, I was just going over that. Make sure we have a refresher on that. In order to install an application, of course, we do yum. We're going to say install, and then we're going to say the name of the program. In this case, it's going to be nfs-utils. And what this does is this installs all the network file system utilities. What is network file system? All right, so essentially what we can do, and I really wish the school was set up this way, but what we can do is we can actually have what is a network file system, so that when people save files on their computer, they think it's a folder on their computer, and it's not. It's actually a folder on the server. To them, it looks just like a regular folder on the computer. They cannot tell the difference. Instead, though, when they save their files, it's actually going on the server. So how cool would it be if when you logged into one of the computers at the school here in the lab and you saved your files, then you go to log in on another computer and your files are still there? Right? That's what we're doing. No kidding, right now. That is what we're doing today. We're setting up a server to do that. Now, in order to have it where it tracks between the different computers, we have to have either one of two things. Either NIS as Network Information Service, which we're going to learn next week, or LDAP. And LDAP is really honestly too complicated. All we go over is the file format for it, and that's it. Honestly, implementing LDAP requires an entire book on it, and usually it takes a team of people to develop it. You actually write your own software solution on it in Perl or Python, whatever, server side. And you implement your own solution. NIS is already set up to work out of the box. There are some benefits to LDAP because it is a protocol. It works with all the different operating systems, with third-party hardware and all that. So there is definite benefit to using LDAP over NIS in cases, and so it's used more in modern situations. However, though, you can't expect to be coding, not hard, high-level programming like that. You're going to be scripting programming. You know what I mean? It is a networking job, as far as that goes. But they do pay pretty decent for it. You expect it about $50K. And it's a great starting position type thing to get into the industry, doing something like that, where if you have scripting abilities, or you can do Python, Shell, or Perl, or whatever, and you're taught Python here, which is the main one they want, is Python. That's the main one they want. Over all the others, that's the one they want. If you can do that, you can make $25 an hour. With benefits and everything, which is great, and that's a really good way to get into the industry. And it is a networking job. It's a network admin job as a system administrator, not as a server administrator, but as a system administrator, and scripting tasks, basically to automate tasks for the network. Yep, and that's what you're doing with the LDAP. You're automating your tasks for it. So what that does is, that's what we're going to do next week. Is we're going to have it to where someone can log in on the computer, and with NFS, with NIS, essentially, NFS, you can have that home directory on the server instead of on the client side. Now, remember, what was the big deal about the whole LVM and RAID 5 and RAID 10, RAID 50? What's the big deal about RAID 50? Anybody remember? Well, that's a cluster for multiple servers deal. But the thing with the RAID 5 or whatnot and up is that you have a whole set of hard drives that are locked, set up together, and the files are distributed little bits across each hard drive, right? Then until it builds up the entire file. That means if one hard drive dies, you can pop in another hard drive and reconstruct that data without losing anything. You also get a massive performance increase too, right? It's because every single hard drive, basically you're talking about parallel processing with hard drives. So every single hard drive, it actually when you say, give me this file, all 5 hard drives, fire up at once and send the data instead of just one hard drive. So now when you're talking about transferring and storing data, it's way, way faster. And in a network situation, that really matters a whole lot on a local area network because, if you have a whole bunch of people need to transfer several gigs at once, what's going to happen? It's going to bog down. How long does it take to transfer, a couple of gigs on your own computer from one folder to another? It takes a little while, right? So if you have all those hard drives working in tandem with each other simultaneously, it's going to speed it up. You can have like 16 hard drives simultaneously, or hundreds or thousands of them, right? So if you have that file distributed across all those different ones, and the more hard drives you have, the more hard drives you can have fail simultaneously and be able to pop in new hard drives and have it reconstruct that data. It also means you can expand your file system as you need it, right? So say you run out of space and you need more space, you can pop another hard drive into the RAID, and then with the LVM, you can resize your partition without having to wipe it out or anything on the fly inside of Linux. You can't do this on Windows. You can do it on Linux, though. You can resize your partition without having to reformat or redo anything. And now you suddenly have the space you needed. So there's a lot of benefits to it, and you also get another performance gain. The one thing you have to be careful about, though, is all the hard drives need to be the same size on a RAID, because the smallest one, wherever the smallest one is, all the hard drives come down to that size because it does have to distribute those bits across the hard drive, so you have to have that space. So, if you're like, oh, I'm going to add an 80 gig hard drive to my 500 gig hard drive block of drives, on my RAID, that's great. You just took all your 500 gig hard drives and brought them down to 80 gigs. And that could be a problem where data. Yeah, yeah, no, not cool. Don't do that. That'd be a really stupid thing to do. And there's people that do stupid stuff like that, but don't do that. Don't be one of those people. It's a great way to get fired. To bring in a specialist to find out what you did wrong. Oh, that'd be terrible. All right. Anyways, but if you yum install this, this gives you those utils. And so essentially what we could do is we can have these people's home directories up on the server. Okay? And then when they log into their user, they're logging into the server instead of on their personal computer. And they think they're logging on their personal computer right in front of them. Now we're actually doing that where you're actually logging into the server and not on the machine. But we do have each person's account on the machine instead of it being on the server for the file system. Now this would actually put it on the server on that. So, there's some benefits here where you're less likely for the employees to lose their work, what they're doing, and things of that nature. So there's some definite benefits to this over running it client side. Yeah, and losing your work's a big deal. If the hard drive dies and you haven't been backing up for 2 years, that actually happened at Valve. They were literally, Valve, the game company, whatever. Sorry, a lot of my examples come from the game industry because I've worked in the game industry and the film industry. I've worked on major games and films, so my apologies. That's where I'm coming from on a lot of stuff. Anyways, the idiots were sitting there. They're smart people, but this wasn't the smart thing they were doing. They were basically doing their they were doing these client machines, and we run the crap out of these machines. We run them hard, man. And they were just IDE hard drives, and then they didn't have a server-side solution where they were storing the data, right? So they're storing all the data on the actual client machine, and then when they upgrade the computer, they take the same hard drive and move it onto the other computer, and they weren't backing up the data. So when the hard drives went, they lost 2 years of work that these employees did. I'm not kidding you, and it happened over and over again, and they didn't come up with a solution for it for a long time. I think they are doing it networked now, but at the time, and this wasn't long ago, this was like 4 or 5 years ago they were doing that. So yeah, not smart, but that is what they were doing. So having this solution can really save you a lot of headaches. And the cool part is, so when they log in, they're actually not logging on their machine, although they think they are, and then they can see all their files. And then when they store all their files, they're actually getting stored on the server. So say someone gets a promotion or something like that, right? What would you normally have to do, right? You'd have to set up a whole brand new computer for them, right? Transfer all their files, image the machine, all that stuff, set it all back up, transfer over the files, and have everything in place again, right? Not so when you have NFS with NIS or something of that nature, right? Instead, all you do is you set up the new computer with a new image on it for their new special machine for their office, and you move them from one location to another to their new office, and then they log in and they have their files. You don't do squat. You don't do anything. Does that make sense? It just cut your workload down to like nothing. So what was going to be a lot of headache and a lot of work suddenly becomes nothing at all. Does that make sense? This is a very flexible solution. Could allow you could even set it up remotely if you wanted to where someone could access their files remotely. It'd be slow. I don't recommend that. You better have a fast connection for that. But it could be done though. If it's needed and required, that can be done. You can do it across the world or whatever if you need to. So that's some of the benefits to this, and I don't think it takes much to realize that that's really actually quite useful. If you tie this in with Samba, which you're going to learn in a few weeks from now, that would let you have Linux act as a Windows server, and essentially you get the same setup there with Samba with the NIS and the NFS, and so you could have one Linux server basically be the file server and login network server with a unified file system for Windows, Linux, and Mac. Essentially, you created a NAS. I'm not kidding you. You did, NAS. You created one of those. So now you have a centralized file storage system that works on every operating system and doesn't get viruses. And it's twice as fast on the internet connection and saves 50% faster on the hard drives. Is this making sense? So that's why this matters. Okay? Realize this isn't the only piece. You can take other pieces and hook them together and get super powerful solutions for networking for within the companies. And so this is great because you can wipe out on your Linux with like AV-Clam. You can wipe out Windows viruses on Linux without ever passing them on to your Windows users. And if they get viruses on their personal files that would be stored on the server, you can eliminate them without any chance of the server catching the virus. Is that making sense? So this will seriously squash virus spreading on networks, because if you set up a Windows server on there and one user, daggone, if you have a file server and it's Windows and that virus gets onto that file server, which is very possible, and then that thing can spread across the whole company and everybody has that virus, nothing flat, right? Google got broken into through the Windows Update Manager from China. That's how China broke into Google. So now they're on Linux only. They were like 90-something% Linux, but that is how they got their network penetrated. Yeah. There's no stopping viruses on Windows. They don't have the security level that's really needed to block it. And then we have the NSA with the secure Linux kernel on it. You know what I mean? Which is what we have here. So it's super secure. It really blocks Trojans at the lowest levels and basically squashes viruses altogether. So we really just don't have viruses on Linux for the most part. I mean, I've been on Linux for 18 years, never caught a virus. So, you know. You got some of the smartest people in the world doing the Linux kernel. Seriously. So, it makes a big difference. So, and you have the whole world working on Linux, whereas you only have one company working on Microsoft. So they do what they can, but yeah, that's where open source kicks butt. Honestly, Microsoft does do what they can, but they don't have a very good policy towards making sure their stuff is bug free and all that too. And so when you don't do that, then there's more holes and more openings for stuff to get into. So if you're not really trying to make sure you've engineered your software to where it's really clean, which they don't, then you're going to have a lot more openings, a lot more problems. So, and we've seen that a lot of times at this point. So, they do some stuff well. Mainly, it's the game stuff. That's what they do well on their DirectX is actually quite good from Windows. But anyways, that's how you install it. You're going to hit enter at this point in time, and then that will install your tools. Once those are installed, you say yes to everything, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have to do a couple of things. One of the things you have to run is chkconfig right here, right, to turn it on. We need to turn it on so that way when we reboot the server, it comes up every time. Can everybody see this well? Is that clear? Do I need to make it a little bit bigger? Hey, how about that? It's a little bit bigger. Okay, cool. Everybody can see it good. All right, so then we're going to say, and then the name of the server, which is going to be NFS, and then on. and then it turned it on just now. And then I need to say service. Notice I didn't have to say /sbin. Now, if you want the full path to this, again, you could do /sbin/service, but it won't matter. It will work in Red Hat without having to do that. And every other distribution of Linux except for CentOS, well, all the major ones anyways. SUSE, you don't have to give the full path for it. Ubuntu, you don't have to give the full path for it. Mandriva, you don't have to give the full path for it. Only CentOS requires you to do that. So Debian also shouldn't have to give the full path on it either. Service, NFS here, and then start to tell it to start that server. So this is cool. We don't have to restart our computer after we install something. Instead, we can just tell it to start, and it starts it up immediately. If we need to make changes to something and restart it, we simply do the same command right here, and we say to restart. Does that make sense? Cool. And something I'd like to point out here, and that is NFS is the only server I know of on Linux that you do not have to restart it when you make changes to it. So you can make changes to the server and they're immediately live. You don't have to actually no. Not on this one. All the other ones, yes. On all the other servers, yes, you do have to restart them. But on this one, you don't have to. And the reason why is because when the clients connect, it grabs the list of directories that are being served up by the server, and so it just grabs that list again each time. So therefore, there's no need for the exports file, because you can just edit like that. There's no need to restart your server because it grabs from that file each time. So it's not having to rebuild anything, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, and that makes up like 95% of your server right there is the exports file. The exports file essentially is the NFS server, more or less, as far as that goes. Okay, so at this point we have the server running. Now, we're going to have to network with ourselves, again, because we only have 2 cores to work with on the computer. So we would need a quad core in order for us to do multiple virtual machines running together. If you want to do that at home, that's cool, and you'll actually enjoy it. It's actually quite cool to do this. If you want to, though, you could set up 2 virtual machines at home if you have a quad core or higher. You do have to have a quad core to do this, though. Okay, if you have a dual core at home, you can't do what I'm about to tell you. But if you do have a quad core, what you can do is set up 2 virtual machines running in your operating system, right? And then you can make one of them the server and one of them the client and network them together over their virtual private network. All right? And the way to do that, oh yeah, totally, you can. The way to find that out, do ifconfig right here, and this gives you all your information on your computer. Now on Windows it's ipconfig, but on Linux it's ifconfig, so don't get confused on that. It messes with people. But essentially, we can see our IP address here on the virtual private network. And we do have a virtual private network with inside the virtual machines. So when you launch multiple virtual machines, you can actually network them together inside the virtual private network that they have set up running inside of VMware. Does that make sense? And then you can literally network them together. It's really cool because you can set up a whole client-server situation. You can set up multiple clients hooking to a server, and you can network them all together. You can have a one where you launch Windows on one, launch Linux on one, launch Linux on another, have Linux be the server for Windows and Linux here, and network all 3 together. But again, you'd have to have 4 cores, one for the host operating system, one for your Linux server, one for your Linux client, and one for your Windows client to do that. Does that make sense? So you essentially would have to have quad-core processors to handle that. Is everything I'm saying making sense right now? Some people are saying yes, other people have fear on their face. Okay. It's okay, you can go back through this again. I know I'm talking about a lot of stuff you probably never even heard of, but yeah, it will make sense as you go through and do stuff. So, none of you have ever seen this before. Don't worry about it. It's actually really easy to do the lab. But this is why it's going to be good for you to go back through this video, because you can gain a better understanding going back through this information instead of just hearing it one time. Something else I want to point out here too, here's your broadcast address, which is no duh. But besides that, here's also your mask. See, here's the mask. Not the movie, but the subnet mask. And then you also have your hardware address, which is your MAC address. Yep. So there you are. LO stands for loopback, and so this is your loopback address in here. Okay. So on and so forth. And here's your virtual setup here. So very cool. And with this, it lets you have. And here's the other thing about this. I might as well just show you guys all this stuff. Why not, right? So honestly, I set that up. Let me show you something about this. Right. So we got this address right here. Right. So we know that we can have the setup, and I believe this is the virtualized address and not the actual address of the machine. I think this one might be the virtual one right here. I'm not sure. I'll find out in the lab and I can verify. It's either this one or the one above. Let's try this one just for the heck of it, right? I just feel like it's maybe since it's VIR virtual, might have a better chance of it being the right one. All right, let's try that anyways. I'm going to go into my etc folder because that's where all my configuration files are for just about everything, right? We learned that last week. Okay, cool. And then when I'm in here, we have the host file, right? So if I cat host or host ls, what's that? CD. I forgot to say CD. I was like, I'm being an idiot. CD for change directory space / etc. And then if I say cat hosts like that, we can see the information inside this file. But I want to edit this file so I have it other than just loopback in there, right? So at this point, then I can actually assign a name to this computer if I want. Actually give my server a name, and this is a static address setup, basically right here. I'm just going to do this directly in the file. So if I do VI, I can't remember if they have VI or VIM for Red Hat. Let's try VIM. If it doesn't like us, then we'll do VI. It is VIM, awesome. This is the upgraded version of VI. And then, if I do O here, it puts me on the next line instead of I put me on the same line. And then all I have to do here is if I like, I can put in that address. Well, I guess it would help if I did Control Shift and V. And remember, if you're copying, it's Control Shift and C for copy. Control C kills the program, so wherever you're running is going to come to an end, right? So you don't want to do that. So it's Control Shift and C. That's why you can't just do Control C, Control V. And then to paste, it's Control Shift and V to paste. All right, so there's my address, and then I can give it a name. What should we name this server? Nate? Awesome, very original. Bacon server. Yeah, sounds sounds like a restaurant. All right, so there we go. It's bacon server now. So if I say escape shift ZZ, and it saves it. So now, when I ping bacon server, check it out. It corresponds to that IP address. And now we can actually network with the bacon server. Does that make sense? It's very cool. And this is how you can set up your static address list inside of Linux. You put it in the host file. No kidding. That's how you set it up. If you do that, then you can actually have it to where you can have when we have NIS, right, you can set up a static address list, and then when everybody gets their information for the host file from the server, that everybody gets that static address list to find all the other machines on the network. So essentially, it lets you just do one static address list for the entire network. Then it becomes manageable, if you will. Personally, I still think it's better to do DHCP with an association of a MAC address with particular addresses, because it still gives you the security of a static address without having to have static addresses. And that way you still have dynamic. And it allows people not to get on the network unless they have a MAC address that matches your security check. So yeah. That's my own personal opinion, though. But anyways, there's that. So with that set up, now, so what we need to do is, let's be honest, cd into /, which is our root directory, right? And if I say ls right here, cool. I need to create a directory that I'm going to pretend to be the server's directory. And usually you will put it in /, okay, for this. Does that make sense? Okay. You could put it in var if you wanted to. I mean, if I want to, all right, let's do that, because that's where a lot of the servers are, and so it might make you guys feel more comfortable if I put it in var. Okay. Yeah, all right, fine. In the var, not that, but var. So cd in the var, and here's where our servers are stored typically. Okay, and I can create a new directory, mkdir, and then I can say something like nfs folders maybe. What do you guys think it should be called? NFS. How about NFS dir for directories? How does that sound? Does that sound good? All right, cool. Something like that. All right, and so there's our wonderful folder right there. NFS dir. All right, cool. So we're in here. Let's create a folder because typically you'd have multiple folders for this, but in our case, we're just going to do this. And I don't know. Let's call it like NFS. How about NFS like server? So that way you know that this is the NFS server folder. Does that sound good? Of course, I need to say mkdir. I'm going to make this real clear as to what is the server and which part is the client, because we are going to be networking with ourselves, so I want that to be very apparent and clear. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, cool. Now, if I do an ls-l, one of the things we'll notice immediately here is that this is root, and we don't want to be root for this folder on there because we do want people to be able to network with it. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. So in order for other people to access this, I need to change the user. Now, we already have a user called student. I could use that. I could set up a custom user and group to work with. I could create a special group, do an add group or something like that. I could do it through a graphical interface. Add group is the command for it. And I could literally add in a group where everybody has access to that group, and therefore anyone that was part of that group would then be able to access this NFS server folder. Does that make sense from client side when they got in? So yeah, we're going to do a chmod. I'm going to change chown here. So first off, I want to do a chown here. I want to say student because that's the user we have on the system already, right? So NFS server, and so students can become the owner of it. So if I want to do this like really well and not just do it like kind of halfway, I'm going to create a user for it. So maybe I should show that, right? All right. Where is add user? That's add remove software. Where's add user? Applications. Yeah, they moved everything around, so let's try. This should be a server-side task. Usually this goes in something like system tools. This is where they normally store this. What's on the other? Other. Why? Anyways, sure. Users and groups. Not making sense to me, but anyways, it's non-standard. All right, and then here's where we can add our groups, right? So I could add a new user, and I could call this like NFS user. Yeah, and too lazy, so I'm just going to copy and paste that. Password is going to be password for this. Go ahead and do this too. Password again. Now normally you would put an actual real password in on this thing. This user, I don't want him to actually be on the system, so I'm not going to create a home directory on this. Does that make sense? And I don't care about the ID. Create private group for the user. Yes, I do want a group to go with this. Now, so anyone who has this person, yeah, I'll use it anyways. So what I can do here is then go back over to my student here. I can go over here and check out groups here. And we'll just scroll down to NFS user, and now this user is part of that group. And now any user I add to that group would then have access to this folder when I change the group permissions over. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so that's what I'm doing. Here's my magical user that no one has use of, and they have no permission to do anything on the system. So essentially, if someone somehow found a way of breaking in or something like that, we let them have the permission to do nothing on the system with this user set up. Does that make sense to everybody? This user has no permission to do squat for nothing. Okay, it's the way we like it. And then we just add the other users to have access to this group so that they can all share in on this folder on the network. So essentially what we could do is we could set up like an accounting folder or maybe web development folder, and then literally everyone's web development can get stored in a centralized folder on the server, and they can all work together, and that way they can work off of each other's templates or files or images, and they don't have to remake a bunch of stuff. Does that make sense? And we don't have to sit there and store that whole set of files over and over again on each client-side computer. Instead, we just store it in one central location on the server, and everybody accesses that data. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, cool. So That's what we're doing here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm still fine with that being, well, no, let's change the owner here. So let's do this right. I'm doing it right, the way you would want to do it. So let's do it all the way you want to do it. chown. All right, so let's change it over to NFS user, NFS server. Thought about doing it easy and didn't. You say, here it works, blah blah blah. Now I'm like, nah, let's do it right. So chgrp space here NFS user, like this, and then NFS server, right? Like that. All right, now I can prove this if I do the ls right here. Check it out. Now it's NFS user for user and group. Makes sense? But our permissions are not the way we want. D for directory. We have read, write, execute for user, but we also need read, write, execute for group. And then I want no permissions for everyone else. I don't want them having access to do squat to this thing. Right. So 770 exactly for your permissions. Read, write, execute, nothing. So user has read, write, execute. Group has read, write, execute. Everyone else has no permissions at all. So chmod to change the permissions. 770 just like they said, and then NFS server. All right. So if I do an ls-l on this, check it out. Now we have our directory is the D here. Then we have read, write, execute for the user, read, write, execute for everyone else, for group, that is, for read, write, execute for group, sorry. Everyone else gets no permissions at all. Making sense, everybody? All right, so that's going to be our server folder. This is the one we're going to end up sharing. Make sense? Cool. Now, I'm going to launch another terminal just because it's for my own sanity, so that way I can easily and clearly define server client in my head. Does that make sense? It also makes all the client-side commands on one terminal, where all the server-side commands are on the other terminal, and I don't have to worry about getting them mixed up between the two. It's easier for your screenshots, too. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to step in here, and I'm going to launch this terminal. I'm going to make it bigger so we can all see it. And this is the student here. This is the student folder. I'm in the student directory. I can prove that by typing pwd, present working directory. If I ls in here, we can see my folders. I need to create a client-side folder inside this user that they can connect to the server folder and access those files. Does that make sense? All right, so I need to do that. Easy way to do that is to say mkdir right here, and then I'll just say something like nfs client. How about that? Is that clear enough for folder name? So if I say mkdir make right here, NFS client, cool. And then I can say ls-l, and we can see our permissions on here, student, NFS client, etc. right here. And we're going to connect it up. Now remember, student does have permission to have the group NFS group in it, so that's all cool as far as that goes. So we'll see what happens with this. Should work, but we'll see if it's a problem. I'll change some permissions on this. All right. So that's set up for client and the server now for the folders. Now we have to do the actual directory listing on the server side so that the clients can connect to the server and connect to this folder. Of course, those folders have to exist before we put that entry in there, right? So that's why we created our folder, server and client first, before we went through the process of adding this line in the server so that people can access it. They can't access something that doesn't exist. So you must create the folder server side that they're going to access before you put the entry inside of NFS server and NFS exports in order to access that folder, right? Make sense to everybody? Chicken can't become before the egg. All right. Or did it? Yeah. Anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and go to another desktop here, and this is where multiple desktops come in handy. Here I am. Of course, we have no internet connection, but don't need to. I'm going to access my webmin. Now, I went and downloaded. Let me show you where to get the webmin. You're going to go to www.webmin.com. You're going to go there, and you're going to download and go into the downloads, and you're going to look for the RPM version. It's going to be the one for Red Hat, CentOS, blah, blah, blah. That's the one you want. It's going to be, I think, the second line down on the downloads. They'll have a tar.gz one, I think, before that. And then you can download the .rpm. Download the .rpm one, and then after you're done downloading, you can double-click on it. and I can show you what I'm talking about. So in my downloads folder, I downloaded it right here. You see it, webmin, this version here. It doesn't really matter. It's a no arc, which means it doesn't have to be compiled. It's nothing but script, so it's cool. You double click this thing, and then it's going to bring up a pop-up window like this for the install. You literally click install, and then it's going to ask you for your password for the root privileged user, which is administrator. Your password is password. I'm doing this to make things simple. All right, so after all that stuff is good and going, it will install, and then you'll have Webmin installed on your system. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I'm not going to continue with this because I've already installed it. But I'm just showing you this is how you get it. I also have a link directly inside the classroom thing to help make life easier for you. But in order to access Webmin, it's not going to be an application actually in your applications over here. You're not going to find it over here. Instead, you're going to access it through the web browser. This isn't in your book, but trust me, if you learn Webmin, everyone loves Webmin, hands down. Everyone can agree Webmin is awesome. All right. Once I show it to you, you won't want to go back to anything else on that as far as that goes. All your networking is in one place. No kidding, for setting up your servers and handling client-side tasks, even system-side tasks. I mean, everything you can think of, just about. NFS, sorry, VS, FTP is not category, but it's about the only thing I can think of that isn't. Essentially, if I do HTTPS on here, sometimes it varies. Sometimes it's not going to be HTTPS, and sometimes it's going to be HTTP. And then I say something like / right here, and then I say localhost.local domain colon 10,000. Normally it's 10,000 and not 1,000. Sometimes it's 1,000. If you have problems, try varying these around between 10,000, 1,000, and HTTP and HTTPS. When I did it on here, it's HTTPS. For you guys, it probably be exactly like this. I can't promise it. Sometimes it will vary on every single person's computer in the lab. And there's only 4 possible combinations, so those are those 4 possible combinations. But anyways, it comes up here. It says, this is untrusted connection. Why is it saying this? Because this is your SSL security key or PIM file, and you weren't signed by one of the authorized signing companies for certification so that your security key is good. Instead, you're self-signing, meaning you're saying, I certify myself. And the web browser says, we don't trust that they certify themselves. You know what I mean? So that's why they pop this up. So if you don't ever want this message to pop up, you will have to sign with one of those companies online. There's only about 6 of them. Talk about an awesome job. They just set that up and then they just roll in the money. But yeah, trust me, they roll in the money. But you say, I understand the risks here, and you say add exception. And it says, oh, get the certification, confirm security exception. You say yes. All right, pops up. Now I get this asked a lot. Well, what's my username? It's root. You're the administrator. If you're going to do anything with any of the servers at any point in time, you always have to be root. Root. That's the administrator. So root is the user, and the password is password. Okay? I'm going to say remember my login permanently, so that way I don't have to get asked this question again later on from you guys. I'm going to click login. All right? All right, cool. I don't want to remember password. If you want to, you can. I don't care. And then what I did is I bookmarked it so that way I didn't have to worry about this being a problem later on. Is this making sense? I'll bookmark this like so. And then I dragged and dropped it onto here, into my bookmarks. So now I can just click it in the future without having to hand enter it each time I want to go to the webmin. Does that make sense? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, you've done it before in CentOS if you had me before, because I love it. All right. So, but you don't have this little bookmarks toolbar by default anymore. They hid it away. I'm sorry, because they thought it would look cooler if it didn't have it. I like to have it. It makes life easier for us, especially. So if you want, you can throw your bookmarks up on here. It makes life a lot nicer. If you go to View right here, Toolbars, just turn on Bookmarks Toolbar. Turn that on here on the check mark, and it'll make it appear. Because by default, it's already unchecked. Does that make sense to everybody? Do that, and then you can drag and drop your bookmark from here to here, like so, and then it will appear right here. And then all you have to do is click that, like so. Make sense? All right. Once you're in here, cool thing about this is, check it out. Look at all these servers. NFS. Next week we'll do NIS. Literally. Yeah, we don't have it installed, so yeah. Yeah. Each one's a different server. Besides that, we also have servers. Lists more servers. We have others, which lists stuff like command shell, custom commands, file manager, HTTP tunnel, PHP configuration. Remember PHP configuration with Apache? There we go, man. Perl modules, protected web directories, SSH login. We did that last week with SSH, right? System and server status, text login, upload and download. I'm just going to go through this a little bit here. This is pretty cool. SSL tunneling for tunnels for that, for security. So everything's encrypted. TCP wrappers. This is where you're going to have your security for your import and exports, where you can block entire networks or individual computers and whatnot in here for different services. Here's your IDMAT daemon. You got your Kerbos. I'm not going to get into that. Bandwidth monitoring. Here you can see if your bandwidth is going crazy or not on your web server or whatever. Or it could be a file server. Maybe a whole bunch of people are hitting the files all at once and you're trying to figure out why the bottleneck is happening or whatever, and you can't figure out where it's happening. Here, it lets you see your bandwidth so you can see if something's off or not. Very cool as far as that goes. You can check it on the different interface cards. So, you could have multiple Ethernet cards and you can actually check the bandwidth on each card here, etc., including the virtual private network. Remember, this can be running in command line, run level 3, networked. Run level 3 is command line network. Run level 5 is graphical. Run level 4 is set up to wherever you want to make it. Run level 2 is command line non-networked, which means it's not on the network, which is great if you get hacked, something fierce or something like that, and you need to just take everything off the network, but you still need to work with it. Go to run level 2, and then you're completely off the network, but you can still access everything through command line. So that's great. You do have to be at that computer, though. Realize if you're running run level 2. Run level 1 is network administrator level only, and that's for fixing things like hard drives and things of that nature to fix the inode balancing. I'm not going to get into that right now. And then run level 0 and 6 is restart and startup type thing. Shut down, startup, blah, blah, blah. Make sense? Cool. So if you're running in run level 3 here, basically you wouldn't have a graphical interface on your server, right? But if you have Webmin installed on it, check it out. You can graphically configure, check the bandwidth, look at all the stuff graphically from the server on your client machine that you're using to do the network administration with remotely connected into it, right? And it doesn't affect your bandwidth because it's just text. Yeah, it's cool. It's got these little buttons and all this. They aren't graphically being drawn. They're being drawn client side, not on the server. None of this is being computed from the server. It's just sending a text file. It's just as a web page. Essentially, we're using web pages to do all of our network administration. So it's cheap. We're talking kilobits to be sent, not multiple megs, several times per second, which is what you're looking at when you're streaming video. You're looking at several megs, maybe 30 frames per second or something like that, right? So that could end up being like 60 megs per second that you're going to send just so you can, modify some file versus that of a few kilobits like this. So this is like 10,000 times less data being sent. This is not going to tax your server at all. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is why this is cool. Here's your hardware. Check it out. CD burner. Here's your grub bootloader. Your Linux RAID. Here's your logical volume management. So you can set up your logical volumes and manipulate them, etc. Partitions on the local hard drive. Printer administration, smart drive status, system time. Anybody need to do server clusters? Here they are. Here's how you do your server clusters. Yeah, you think that's it. Nope, there's more. There's also stuff here in the system like shut up and boot down, change passwords, disk quotas. Yeah, you can actually set limits on people, which is really great. I haven't gotten into this. You set up quotas where it lets people only have certain sizes for their each user's home folder, right? And you limit to how big it can be, and you can give them a margin of how much over that they can go type thing. And that's what disk quotas allows. So it prevents, because usually you only get like 2% of people who are going to be hard drive hogs, but they can eat up your entire server hard drive with a whole bunch of stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with their work. And they will. They'll download anything, everything you can imagine. They'll sit there and throw like every movie you can imagine, or music on there, or umpteen applications and games, or whatever. And they'll just literally just load up the whole server, and like none of it will have anything to do with work, if that makes sense. So, I mean, you got to limit those people. It won't affect majority of your workers, but there are a few people, and then you want to affect them because they're not going to quit. So, here's your disk and network file system backup. Yeah, it even lets you do file system backup. Log file rotation, so that way you can rotate your log files. We haven't gotten into that. And Mimi type programs, not getting into that. Here's your PAM authentication. Remember we talked about PAM last week with VSFTP. Awesome. Running processes. This lets you see what processes are running on the server graphically. Schedule commands. Cron jobs, so that way you can schedule for backups or events to happen at some later time where you're not around at night and no one's there type thing. You can just have it automatically go and do whatever thing you need to do on the server without you actually having to stay up and do it. So you can go to sleep, go do whatever you need to do, go out, get lunch or whatever, and it will go off and do what it needs to do that you want to do. You can automate scripts and tasks or whatever for server-side type of actions, and then go off, set up a cron job, it'll go do it when it needs to be done. And you want to run these, by the way, when other people aren't working. So that way you don't take down the whole network. Don't be the idiot who sits there and runs it during prime time work time. You know what I mean? And then no one can do their work because you know how much money that wastes for a company that's they having to pay all those employees and they can't do any work. So literally however it is per hour for all those employees combined, that's how much you're costing the company when you do something like that. Don't do that ever. Schedule commands, cron jobs, software package updates, to update the software on the server, software packages, system documentation, system logs, and also users and passwords. You can set up users and passwords in greater detail than what we had with the user and password stuff from Red Hat. So you can see why I'm a big fan of this. And this works for every distribution of Linux. You learn this and you can set up any Linux server graphically this way. Make sense? This is across the board. I'm big on across the board. There's lots of flavors of Linux. And there may be new ones that come up. I don't care. This will always work type thing. You know what I mean? So you learn this, you're good for everything type deal. That's what I like. I don't like, well, this is how we do it on Red Hat. Now, this is how we're going to do it on Synos. This is how we're going to do it on Ubuntu. Here's how we're going to do it on Mint. Here's how we're going to do it on SUSE. Screw that. Do it just one thing here that goes across everything. There, you're done. Awesome. So, that's kind of the way I am on this. So anyways, here's NFS. It is very easy, but it gives us lots of control and lots of power, which is the way we want it. So I'm going to click Add Export because I'm going to export a directory to be shared with the clients from the server. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to add the export, and it comes up with this whole big, wonderful panel of information. Let's break this down. Even has help. They're adding help into it. This thing is great. All right, so one of the things I don't want to have is this export thing in front of it. I hate that. It's up to you what you want to do, but I don't like that. This is that sudo export directory. To each their own. I just don't like it. Anyways, I'm going to come in here to var. I'm going to double click it, so I go inside of var. And then inside of var, we see our NFS dir. And then we'll have our NFS server right there. Okay, whatever. There it is. Everybody see that fine? So put that whole line in there, and it inserted it in there. You should be able to find this. You know what I mean? That's where we create it, and that's where we put it. We put it inside of var because that's where servers are. Put it inside of a folder to store all the folders, so it'll just be easy in one place. And then I put, there's the server for that particular one. All right, active export to, yes. And everyone. Now we could list individual hosts and all this stuff if you really wanted to. I'm not going to do that. Blah blah blah. NIS net group. If you had NIS going, you would want that. You could use that. NFS clients. We're just going to use sys here. We're not going to worry about it, but you could have IPv4 network with this netmask or IPv6 address here, etc. Security level, you could set those if you wanted to. I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave it at none, but if you wanted to, you could set these up. And this one we absolutely want it, and this is the read-only. By default, it does read-only. We want it to be read-write, so I'm going to change that from a yes to a no. Essentially what this does is it writes the exports file for us. So that way we don't have to remember all the little syntax variations inside the file. And this basically simplifies it. It doesn't take away the fact you actually have to know what you're doing. You still have to understand everything and know everything. It just means you don't have to worry about memorizing syntax absolutely, precisely, exactly. Oh, I have to put a space there. Oh, I have to put a colon here. Oh, I have to put parentheses around this. If you screw up, it doesn't work, type thing. You know what I mean? This gets all the syntax correct for you, type thing, when it writes that configuration file for you. And it just makes it easier, but it doesn't take away the fact you have to know what you're doing. And that is something I want to point out. If you need to know some information about something, check this out. They're clickable. And it has information on what an option is. Yeah, I right-clicked on it. I could have just clicked it or whatever, but I didn't. I right-clicked and put it on the other one. Like, for instance, I could have clicked it like so, and it would have popped up like that. Alright, but anyways, this option disables subtree checking, which has a mild security implications but can improve reliability in some circumstances. If a subdirectory of a file system is exported, but the whole file system isn't, then whenever a NFS request arrives, the server must check not only that the access file is in the appropriate file system, which is easy, but also that it is in the exported tree, which is harder. So essentially, it's having to check security permissions and everything. By turning off subtree checking, you're not checking those permissions. So it makes it a little slower because it's got to check the permissions, but it's ideal that you leave them on. So we're not going to disable subtree checking because we want to keep that security there, if that makes sense. Again, this could have been just put in the slash folder instead of in slash var slash. Usually that is where I put it, almost like 99% of the time. But I just want to show you where the var folder was and get people used to it. I don't know. Immediately sync all rights, default. This one's really important. Trust remote users. Everyone except root. Very, very important. Why does that matter? Because yeah, root would have the same ID number, so if someone had a client machine and they logged in as root on that client machine, then they could log in as root on the server, thus giving them root access on the server, letting them take over the server. They could upload a program with root permissions that would run and do all kinds of stuff that you don't want it to do in the background. So always, everyone except root. No one is allowed to upload files as the network admin on here through NFS. They are not allowed to access this through root like this. Okay, you don't want them to allow them to do that, because if they do, when they log in or whatnot, they would be given administrative rights and privileges on the server, which would be a huge security hole, because any client on the network could basically get access to the server and take over the server. So don't allow that to happen. Okay, so we're always going to leave it on everyone except root. Nobody would give no one permission, which you're not going to use most of the time unless you have some horrible breach, I can imagine. And everyone is stupid because you just basically opened up that security hole I just talked about. So don't do everyone. Never do everyone. I don't even think it should be an option. But anyways, you can also treat untrusted users as a particular user that has no rights to do anything. And you can set that for the groups and stuff like that if you want. So you can reclassify their stuff to have no permissions to do anything if you want it. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And their files and their folders they upload. So it has no permission to do squat for nothing for everyone. So if you want to do that, that's where you would set that. Right now we have it set to default, but we can do that if we like. So it's got that ability. Make symbolic links relative. It's up to you if you want to be relative or absolute directories, etc. For those links. Deny access to a directory. You can say, I'm saying no on that. It's just leave it as is. But if we wanted to, we could say that and we could define what that is. Don't trust user ID. So we can say, remember, our user IDs for different users, they have an ID number. They also have a GID, which is a group ID number, right? In the case of a student, it's 500, right? And the new user we just created gave it a user of 501. You know what I mean? I just saw that a second ago. If you go back in your video, you'll see that when we're going through it, whatnot. But essentially, it's not something you've memorized. I'm just saying you could look it up and then say, hey, I need to block this particular user or something like that. You know, they shouldn't have right. And then you can put those in there. But with that, we literally didn't have to really do anything other than pull up this directory here and basically set read only to no. Does that explain all these different parts of this thing? That makes sense. Okay, cool. So I'm going to click create. All right, so it created it. I'm going to check this right here. I'm going to say enable selected. And then I'm going to check it again. I'm going to say apply changes. All right, let me try moving this to, it didn't like it. Oh. All right, let me try moving this over to the home directory. It doesn't want it to be inside of var. That's fine. It doesn't like that. I knew there was a reason why I never did it the other way. All right, let's move that over, shall we? Okay, so let's just move that real quick. MV here, NFS server needs to be moved over into slash. Really? I've moved tons of folders before. That's ridiculous. Hold on a second. I can just recreate this real quick. CD and slash. Okay, it created the directory over here automatically. How about that? Yeah. Let me go have a look at this real quick. If you click on everyone, we can go in here. It changed the folder and everything on us. Yeah, that's the folder. It's right there. Enable selected. Apply changes. I've never had it not work. Maybe. I don't know, it's saying nf-server.service failed to load. Yeah, it may need something installed that I can't download and install it because I'm not allowed to be on the network. Well, that makes life more difficult because normally I just network this and it's a go. Great. It's a bit of a problem. It's just not going to take it. Okay, let me double check that the NFS service is running. Okay. Let me try making another folder just for test real quick. Share, ch own. Let's just try student real quick. See if it likes that better. Not ch own, chgrp. Chmod 7. Alright. Let's try to add a new export. Take that away. And let's choose NFS share. Alright, to read only say no, say create. Okay, yeah, I think it needs something installed that it's missing because that should be working like that. Great. ls cat exports. Let's see if it put anything in the file. It did. Okay, so it did do the entries in the file, as we can see here. vim slash etc slash exports. If we go in here, we can see it does actually have these entries placed in here. So this is how you create the entries for NFS. I think because I don't have an internet connection and I do need, there is one thing I didn't install, and I'll show you that in just 1 second here. I didn't think it would be a problem, but it looks like it's becoming a problem. So I could check to see if the RPC bind is running or not. Usually I don't ever have to worry about that, but maybe it's an issue now in Red Hat 15. Don't know. Never has been, but whatever. Anyways, we do. It does have both entries, so it is set up on the configuration file for the server. So once the server does actually work, when everything's running or whatnot, it will work as far as those exports will be shared. Let me check real quick. The RPC bind was installed when we installed the NFS utils on the yum install. So technically I should be able to come in here and say chk config space RPC bind and then space on. This is on page 796. And then I can do the same thing again, make that start and then change that over to service. The other thing that could have been installed is the graphical, which I didn't think should matter because I don't normally have to install it. Don't normally install it either, for that matter. But it would be yum install, and this would be your system. This is on page 801. System dash config dash NFS, and this is the graphical tool for Red Hat in order to make it install the graphical tool for NFS. It's not as robust as the Webmin is. Webmin is better for that. It has a lot more details and everything. This is the first time I ever had NFS not start on me. I do need to show you the command to mount it, which isn't going to work considering that the server is not running. I could try restarting the server, see if that fixes anything. Let me show you what the command is real quick, and then I'm going to try restarting the server, see if that fixes something. Alright, so when in doubt, restart the server on stuff. I've actually had that fix things where lower processes underneath the hood in Red Hat didn't start up like they should have or whatnot, and restarting the computer will sometimes jumpstart them and make them work. And I don't know where underneath the hood it would be, and it varies every daggone release, so you don't know what's going to happen from one release to the next in Red Hat. It's just par for the course. That's the way things go. But anyways, what we would do is you'd say mount here, and this is how you do it to test things out, things of its nature. And then you could say the server name, which could be bacon server, right? Because we did bacon server. You could have done localhost, would work too. But remember, we in ours on here we did bacon server. Now, if you put yours for a different name, put your name of your server here. Remember though, we could do a different one. So I could do here NFS server if it were to work. And then I could do /home/student/NFS client, and then it would network those two folders together. And then when I drag and drop files into the client folder, they actually don't actually go in the client folder. They actually get transmitted up to the server and stored in that server folder. No kidding. It looks like the files are sitting there on my computer, but they're not. They're actually on the server, and it links them together. Once you're done with this, I mean, if I run this command, it's not going to work. Yeah. Didn't work because NFS isn't working. So if I were to want to undo that, I would say unmount, and then I would say what it is I want to unmount. In this case, I would say something like home/student/NFS client, and then it would release that connection. Does that make sense? So let me restart this, and then I'm going to go over the fs tab file file system tab file, which could show up how to set this up permanently, so that every time the computer boots up, it automatically does network. There is a downside to that. I'm going to go over that. They don't go over the downside in the book, but I'm going to talk about it because it is a problem. Okay, whatever. Close. I'm just going to close these out real quick. And if I go over here to student, I can tell it to say shutdown here, and I can tell it to restart. Could also typed in the command to restart by saying shutdown space -r space now, and that will also restart the machine, virtual machine, as a command. That one's useful to know just because if you're accessing a server remotely, then that will let you do it remotely, restart the computer without actually being there. If you want to shut it down, you say shutdown space dash is it shutdown space dash I think it's H space now to shut it down permanently. It's crazy. I've done it umpteen million times. Alright. We're rebooting though. Alright, we can see our new user here. I'm not going to log in as that user. Yeah, you can just kind of like select which user you want to log in as from there. Oh, and which GUI you want. Yeah, GNOME or KDE. Yes, you can select that too. Yeah, I got you. Yeah. Yep. All right. And then from in here, let's try launching our Firefox real quick here. And it should have automatically restarted up all the NFS. Jiminy Christmas. Let me see if NFS always works. This is frustrating. I don't want system monitor. I can see they used to have, let's see if they have it now. They used to have a tool that would let you see which services are running. I think they put it under other now, called services. There it is. And this lets you see if graphically on Red Hat if a tool is running or not. In which case we would look up NFS. Could also use the status command here. Unit is running, so it is running. Okay. Alright, not sure what's going on with it then. Let's go over the fstab file, c/etc here. And what we want to do is vim fstab, which is file system table. We come in here and we can see all the entries for the file system, for the different partitions and everything. Does that make sense? And as it turns out, Webmin was really kind to us because it went ahead and actually networked these for us automatically on it and automatically put the entries in. So normally you would hand enter these, but in the case of Webmin, it automatically created these entries for us to where we didn't have to worry about doing it. So it's pretty cool actually. The downside, though, to this, and this is one of those things where you do need to be aware of this. The downside to doing this setup here inside fstab, something you have to know about fstab, every one of your file entries must work. If it does not work, your system will not boot. All right, because it'll hang on it. Once it hangs, you have to go into run level 1 as the network admin, log in as that as root, and then edit the files by hand with VIM like I'm doing right now, and make changes to the whatever entry it is, like comment it out with the pound sign, etc. Resave it, and then restart with the boot to try to get to boot up. Does that make sense? If you don't do that, it won't work. So here's where you can run into a problem with running basically NFS server entries directly inside your FS tab file. I'm not a big fan of it because the reason why is if your NFS server is ever down, all the clients on the network cannot boot. Does that make sense? Because it must connect to the server. If there's for any reason they're not able to connect to that NFS server, and if that file entry is in here in the FS tab file, it will prevent the client machine from booting up. Does that make sense to everybody? And then you got a mess on your hands to deal with, because in a lot of cases people can do their work on the client machines without having to be on the server and then move their files to the server. So this is not my favorite method. It works, it's just not my favorite method. My favorite method is using auto mounting, which I'll get into a second. You can do that too. That's my favorite method. Alright, but essentially the way this works is you list your server side folder first, and then you list your client side folder where it's going to be bound to, and then you bind it with the bind tool. Bind tool is an NFS client tool for connecting. And then the 0 here is so that it does not FISC the server, because you never want to FISC the server. Clients should never FISC the server. The only thing that should FISC the server is the server, which is where it checks to see if the inodes are balanced on the server with the hard drives. Alright, so that said, there's those entries. Make sense to everybody? Alright, so that's FS tab file system. Let's see here. Oh, I need AutoFS installed. I didn't install that. Great. Well, let's look at a few other commands. A few other things you can check to see if things are running, like if you want to see if mount D is running, you can say ps-ef. This is on page 810, and this lets you see whether or not something is set up here. So grep space mount D checks the mount daemon and see if it's running or not. So we see that is running right here, which is good. And it lets us know that everything is copacetic. Alright, I can also do RPC info. And this lets us check to see if something is running. P for process. And then we're going to check on the local host, which is our server here. Right? And then I'm going to redirect that output into the grep, so that way we don't see every single server known to man, and we only look at the ones for NFS. Does that make sense? So it limits the data down to something manageable. All right, so now we get a listing of all the ones running in NFS, and yes, indeed, it is running. It's running on the TCP and UDP setup there. Okay, cool. So those are working and running, which makes things even more confusing as to why it's not working. If you look at page 811, 811 is where you get into auto mounting. You do need AutoFS installed to do this. And unfortunately, I didn't install it already, so this setup here, so I can't really figure it. But you would say yum install, and you would say AutoFS right here. And what that does is that installs your auto mounting daemon client server. And what this does is it lets you basically have where the client person can double click an icon on their desktop, and then it mounts to the server and makes the connection to the server without having to have server password, have the root administrator's password entered in order to make that mount connection, or have to have it inside the FS tab file. Does that make sense? So now you don't have to worry about the server not booting up because it's an FS tab file, and now you don't have to worry about going around to each person's computer and hand entering in mounts every time they want to connect to the server, right? So honestly, it's just really honestly the best solution. So if you do yum install AutoFS, that will install your AutoFS, and then again you would say chk config space AutoFS space on, and then that will turn it on the server. And then you would say service space AutoFS space start to start it. Okay. and then that would start that server. After that, we can start looking at the master files, and it has a breakdown. So the book goes on a nice breakdown over this, which is very cool. And this is the last of the information on all this. And what we can do is we can, we can see, right now we're in the right location. So if I ls here, we get tons of files. We don't want to see all that. But if I say something like auto here, ls with auto, it's with a star after it. No star, huh? All right. Well, if we cat our auto.master file, do they not have that file anymore? Wow. Yeah, that's typical. And it's not on my system. Probably because I didn't install AutoFS, would be my guess. Jiminy. Alright. Well, normally I just have it there, and I've gotten used to not having to do anything, and it's just there, but it's not there. Basically, you'd have to install that program, and then that file should be there, because it's very standard for that file to be there. And then you can go into that and add additional entries, and you can add additional ones. So you check it out, like auto.misc. You could do like an auto.nfs, for instance. Misc for miscellaneous here. All right, and you can set that up, and then it could have it like map it to a particular auto mounting there for your NFS. So that way, when they double click the folder, it automatically hooks from client to server on there for it. And then when they're done, they can just right click on that folder and say unmount, and it would disconnect from the server. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. And essentially, that's how it works for that. But you'd have to then go and set up your auto.nfs file. If you look at it here on page 8, not 13, they show an example of what's inside of the /etc/auto.mis file, and along with also what's inside of the /etc/auto.plum file, plum. And then here you can see where they actually have mapped with NFS here. So you see a really good demonstration where they have mapped to NFS those files and folders here. So here you see for the auto.plum, you see public space dash fs type, which is your file system type, equals NFS4. Remember, we were doing NFS4 when we were setting up the server here. And then plum is the name of that server. Does that make sense? Colon slash, and then what directory? And this is going to be /home/Zach or whatever. And so that's going to grab Zach's folder on the file on the server, on the Plum server for his personal home folder, and it's going to map it to his home folder, which is going to be, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting that mixed up from between the two. Sorry, that's not Plum anymore. My apologies. Yeah, they're doing plum /home/public. On their other ones for auto.mis for miscellaneous, they did /home/Zach, and then space dash fs type equals NFS space plum /home/Zach. So essentially what that one does is it maps from the plum servers /home/Zach's folder to the actual home/Zach's folder on their client side machine. So when Zach goes into his home folder, he thinks all those files are right there on his machine. They're not. They're actually on the server. If he saves or does anything on his client side here in his folder on his user, it actually gets stored on the server. Does that make sense? So that's pretty cool. And that's how you can set that up. And then it's just a matter of double click. It just becomes an icon on the desktop form. And I can't tell the difference. Cool. And when you do this with the NIS, you can actually have it where you can have these auto files and stuff like that on the server, and then everybody can just get those files from the server. So then everybody has this connection, whoever, to their home directories from a double click setup like this, which is really awesome. Make sense, everybody? Okay. That's essentially how you go about this stuff, and that's essentially how auto mounting works. You use it all the time, like when you plug in a USB drive. That's what the auto mounting is. That's what this auto FS is. It's when you plop in a CD or whatever, it auto mounts it. We're doing the same thing, but we're doing it with a network file system instead of doing it with a CD or a USB drive or something like that. So it makes it, think of the same use you have the same ease and use you have for putting a CD into the computer or plugging a USB drive, how easy it is. It's just an icon that pops up on the desktop and then the folder opens up. Same thing for NFS. They're literally just going to double click that icon. It's going to connect to the server and bam, the folder is going to open up just as if, and they don't know the difference. They don't even realize they're accessing the server, which I think is great. Yeah, so quite literally, from a client end, let me show you the way this works for them. Quite literally for them, they'll just see this, like, in the case of the folder, it'd be this entire folder, like I was just going over. But let's say they just did the NFS client instead, right? When they go into this folder, it looks just like this. No kidding. So if you drag and drop or create folders in here or whatever, instead of them being created in this folder, they're actually getting created on the server. So, they say like my stuff, and they think they're just putting stuff in their personal computer or whatever. They're not. They're actually putting it on the server, and they don't know the difference because it's that seamless. I could literally drag and drop a folder from here to here, copy it in there. It's in there, and it'd be on the server. It's that easy to use from a client side for the end user. Does that make sense? So that's essentially what we're doing, and that's what we're setting up here. We'll go into the lab and see if we can't get this working without, since you guys will have an internet connection, should make a big difference on this. Because I've never had a problem with NFS before in my life, so I don't know what could possibly be a problem other than that, because it is set up correctly. Any questions? No? Cover everything? A lot of information? It's going to be like this every week, guys. Don't miss class.